General, 60 years ago Sunday, President Truman signed the Executive Order 9981, a policy that has changed the face of the military, literally. As we take a moment to celebrate, I want to ask you how this policy impacted you.
When President Truman signed the order, I was just a 10-year-old kid in the South Bronx section of New York City, and I'm sure that I had no acknowledgement, no awareness that such an order had been signed. But a few years later, when I entered ROTC, I was very much aware of it because by 1954, the Army had been completely desegregated. It took 6 years after he signed the order for it actually to happen. And then by the time I entered the Army in 1958, 10 years after the order was signed, the only thing they cared about was could I perform, not whether I was black, white, poor, rich, West Pointer, non-West Pointer, could I perform. And so if I had come along earlier during the days of Jim Crow, the days of segregation and discrimination in the armed forces, I doubt that I could have gotten as far as I was able to get. But by the time I came, all of that was in the past, and the only thing they cared about was, can you perform?
And as you just talked about, a lot of progress has been made since then. Do you still think there's room for improvement?
There's always room for improvement. America was founded on a system where all men are created equal. We know those fabulous words out of the Declaration. We know what the Constitution says. But it wasn't truly the case. It was a dream. It was an aspiration. And we lived through slavery. We lived through discrimination and Jim Crowism. But we are still carrying along part of that old legacy. And so we're not where we need to be. We need to keep working to open up avenues of opportunity for minorities in this country, and not just in the military. The military has been the example, the role model for the rest of the country. But the military shouldn't just sit on its laurels and say, well, we did it well, why can't the rest of you? I think we can be an example to young people. I think through our junior ROTC programs, through sergeants and officers and petty officers and all sorts of leaders getting out into the community and demonstrating to the community what diversity is all about, we can help America continue to move forward till we are at that place in our history, that place in our life where we can look back and say all of that is now behind.
There are a small number of African Americans who are in senior leadership still. The numbers still aren't that big. What do you think is the next step to maybe provide more mentors to the younger African American service members?
I think you can always do a better job of mentoring young people coming along, not just African Americans, but all youngsters coming along. I was mentored when I came along as a young officer. We didn't call it mentoring in those days. We called it getting chewed out by your boss. But I learned from the people who were my immediate supervisors. We all have a responsibility to mentor the people who are our subordinates. Now, you don't mentor all of them the same way. You might find somebody that comes from a different kind of background and requires a different kind of mentoring. It might be social mentoring as well as professional mentoring. But all leaders have a responsibility to take care of the troops entrusted to their care. And one of the most important ways of taking care of somebody is mentoring them and getting them ready to move up, helping them, pointing out their strengths, pointing out their weaknesses, giving them an example.
What would you want to say to service members to tell them why it's so important for them to reflect and recognize the 60th anniversary?
It's an important historical event, and for our young servicemen and servicewomen of today, it might be just ancient history, but it's real in my lifetime. It happened in my lifetime, and it's important for them to remember that 60 years ago, we lived in a country where people were measured solely on the color of their skin, where African Americans who had gone to World War II and who had fought, hundreds of thousands of them had gone and fought and served, and they came back to a nation that wouldn't serve them. This has been our history for 300 years of African Americans serving and not being recognized for it. But after World War II, African Americans came back and said, no, this has to change. And so political pressure was brought to bear, and it would not have happened unless African Americans had stood up for their rights and demanded that it change. We will not continue to serve in a country that will not serve us. It has to be desegregated. And it's important for young people to remember that if we had taken that to Congress and asked Congress to vote on it in 1948, they wouldn't have passed it. But Truman was bold enough, brave enough, and committed enough to make it an executive order and said, this will stop. The executive order says nothing about segregation or integration. It just says everybody will be treated the same. And the next day they said, does this mean desegregation? And Truman, he was very blunt when he spoke. He said, yes, that's what it means. And we need to know that the opportunities that we have now with blacks at all levels in our armed forces, with other minorities at all levels in our armed forces, with women fully integrated in our armed forces at all levels, it's important for young people to recognize this isn't just some miracle that came down from heaven. This is a result of generations of people who went before you, who were denied that opportunity, but who served anyway, because by serving you demonstrated you were as good as anyone else, and therefore should not be denied.
Good words to end on, General. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good luck. Thank you.